Welcome to another episode of Questions in History. In today's episode, we discuss the Coral Garden incident. Now, I'm sure many of you sitting at home saying, what is the Coral Garden incident? Don't worry about it. On today's episode, we ask 5 questions to the Coral Garden incident. First, we ask the what, the where, the why, and why is it important to us today? So let's journey with us and take a step back in time to Coral Garden. The Coral Garden incident occurred in April 1963, just 1 year after Jamaica gained its independence from Britain in 1962. At the time, the country was still defining its national identity, navigating tensions between colonial legacies and new political realities. Beneath the surface, there were deep social divisions, particularly involving the Rastafarian community, which was widely misunderstood, marginalized, and often targeted by authorities. The incident began near Montego Bay, in Coral Gardens area of St. James. A conflict erupted at a gas station involving a group of Rastafarians and local individuals, which escalated into violence. Several people were injured, and at least one person was killed. While the exact sequence of events remain debated, what followed is far more clearly documented and far more significant. In response, the Jamaican government, under Prime Minister His Right Honourable Sir Alexander Bustamante, ordered a nationwide crackdown on Rastafarians. Security forces were deployed, and mass arrests began almost immediately. Hundreds of Rastafarians were detained, many without charge. Reports later revealed that detainees were subjected to physical abuse, forced cutting of their dreadlocks, and harsh imprisonment conditions. The scale and nature of the response went far beyond addressing a localized conflict. Instead, it reflected a broader policy of suppression against a group that was already viewed as deviant or dangerous by mainstream society. Rastafarians were portrayed as a threat to public order, and this narrative justified extreme measures in the eyes of the state. The importance of the Coral Gardens incident today lies in its exposure of state violence against marginalized community in post-independence Jamaica. It challenges the idea that independence automatically brought justice and equality. Instead, it showed how colonial attitude towards race, class, and control persisted with newly independent institutions. Decades later, the Jamaican government officially acknowledged the injustice. In 2017, a formal apology was issued and compensation provided to survivors. This recognition underscores the lasting impact of the society, not just as a historical event, but as a continued conversation about rights, identity, and state accountability. So, the year was 1963, in the month of April. That was the when. And why? Tensions, social tensions. The Rastafarian community, they were simply a new group and people didn't know what they were about. So there were anti-biases against the Rastafarians. What happened? Simply a local conflict that staged a national crackdown. And why is this important today? Well, this is important because it shows that the people of Jamaica, or certain groups, were still being oppressed after independence. Let's examine. Answering the second question, what's the background of the conflict? And who are the most important players? To understand the Coral Gardens incident, you have to understand the positions of Rastafarians in Jamaican society during the mid-20th century. Emerging in the 1930s, the Rastafarian movement was both a religious and cultural response to the colonial oppression. It emphasized African identity, spiritual resistance, and rejection of the Western systems. Often referred to as simply Babylon. However, mainstream Jamaican society, heavily influenced by colonial values and Christian norms, viewed Rastafarians with suspicious and hostile intentions. They were often stereotyped as criminals, extremists, or social outclass. This perception was reinforced by the media portrayals and government rhetoric, which framed the movement as a threat rather than a legitimate expression of identity. By the 1960s, these tensions had intensified. Jamaica had just gained its independence, and there was a strong desire amongst political leaders to maintain order and project stability. Any group seen as destructive was a threat with increased scrutiny. The key political figures at the time was Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Alexander Bustamante, who was known for his strong stance on the law and order. Bustamante led. Previously, he expressed negative views about Rastafarians, which influenced the government's response. On that ground, the law enforcement agencies and local militia played a major role in executing the crackdown. Their actions were often shaped by existing biases, leading to widespread abuse. The Rastafarian community itself was not a centralized organization at the time, but rather a collection of groups and individuals united by shared beliefs. This lack of formal structure made them vulnerable. They had no official representation or protection. The background of this conflict, therefore, is rooted in a cultural misunderstanding, political pressure, and inherited colonial attitudes towards control and conformity. We saw where a local incident at a gas station became a national outrage. At the time, amplified by the media and the narratives of politically exposed persons, and the Rastafarians, they were given what we Jamaicans call a bad name. You have to understand, in those days, there was a famous murder that was committed on the Palisados. The survivor described her attacker as being a bearded black man with dreadlocks. And that was what many Jamaicans consider the start or the launch of the witch hunt against Rastafarians. We saw that the government simply overreacted. But most importantly, what continued this abuse was the lack of accountability on the part of the state. And the third question we ask is what escalated the conflict. The escalation of the Coral Gardens incident was driven by a combination of immediate triggers and long-standing tensions. The initial altercation at the gas station acted as a spark, but it was the reaction to the event that transformed it into a national crisis. News of the violence spread quickly, often exaggerated or framed in a way that heightened fear. Reports portrayed Rastafarians as a dangerous, aggressive, and reinforcing existing stereotypes about the group. This created public pressure for the government to act decisively. Prime Minister, His Right Honourable Bustamante, his response was swift and forceful. Instead of treating the incident as an isolated conflict, it was framed as evidence of a broader threat. This framing was justified by the deployment of security forces across the country. Law enforcement agencies began conducting raids, arrests, and interrogations. The lack of guidelines or oversight allowed these actions to escalate into widespread abuse. The Rastafarians, they were treated as if they were not citizens of Jamaica. This escalation was fueled by the absence of accountability. There were few mechanisms to challenge the actions of the security forces. The political climate disencouraged dissent. This allowed the situation to spiral unchecked. In essence, the conflict escalated not because of the initial violence alone, but because of how the violence was interpreted and exploited by the authority and those involved. The Rastafarians, they suffered a crushing defeat. In summarizing the key decisions and moments, we have to turn to the initial incident that started it. But it was the government's crackdown that defined it. Cultural suppression, mass detainees. At the time, one could imagine The Rastafarians wore their locks as a sign of a promise to their God. And imagine having that locks being removed forcefully by the state. And we also saw later an apology by that same state. Can you imagine in those days, you could be arrested simply wearing a dreadlock or even the stereotypes, Clark's boots. But now that we saw the key decisions and turning points, let's now examine question 4. What were the key moments, turning points, and decision of Carl Gardens? The first key moment was the initial clash at Coral Gardens, which set the entire sequence in motion. While significant, this moment alone does not define the event. It is the response that followed that gave the incident its historical weight. The most critical turning point was the decision by Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Bustamante, to authorize a nationwide crackdown. This transformed a localized issue into a state-driven campaign against a specific group known as the Rastafarians. Another key moment was the mass arrest and detention of the Rastafarians. These actions were not limited to those involved in the original incident, but extended to individuals across the country. This marked a shift from law enforcement to collective punishment. The treatment of detainees, particularly the forced cutting of dreadlocks, which became a significant and powerful symbol of cultural suppression. It was not represented just physical control, but an attempt to erase identity. Finally, the long-term turning point came decades later, when the Jamaican government officially acknowledged the injustice. The apology and compensation process reframed the incident as a human rights violation rather than just a justified response. We saw that the Rastafarians, as a group, they were both marginalized and misunderstood. The year was 1963. We just got our independence, but people were still living in the colonial ways. Most of the conflict was deep rooted in fear and cultural divisions. Religion had its role, but the man and the major player was Prime Minister, His Right Excellent Alexander Bustamante himself. So now that we have established these facts, let's get to question 5. What were the impacts and consequences of Coral Gardens incident? The impact of the Coral Gardens incident was profound and long-lasting. On a human level, the immediate consequences included physical abuse. Psychologically, it was trauma and the loss of dignity for hundreds of Rastafarians. Families were disrupted and communities were left in fear. Socially, the incident reinforced stigma against the Rastafarians. It was validated as a negative stereotype and justified the continued discrimination in the employment sector, education, and public life. They had a wall to climb. This marginalization persisted for decades. Politically, the system was exposed. The vulnerabilities of post independent governance was busted. It showed that the structures of power inherited from colonial rule could be used in similar ways, even under local leadership. This raises important questions about the accountability and human rights of people in Jamaica. Economically, while the direct impact was less pronounced, the marginalization of Rastafarians limited their access to opportunities, contributing to broader inequalities. In the long run, the incident was also contributed to change. It became a reference point for discussions about justice, identity, state responsibility. The eventual apology and compensation signal a willingness to confront past wrongs, even if imperfectly. Today, the Coral Garden incident stands as a reminder that independence alone does not guarantee justice, and that the treatment of the marginalized groups is a key measure of any society. As we Jamaicans would say, show me how you treat your elders and your children, and I tell you what society you live in. Conclude our topic for the day. So we saw where stigmatization led to abuse of the Rastafarian group. We saw how traumatizing this event was. This highlighted and exposed the leadership of the post-independence colonial government. Now, if you have enjoyed this video, please like, share, and do remember to leave a comment. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for staying with us.